Wyatt tapped the mic and said, "Show them your brave face." Carter laughed. "Maybe the grill matches Nolan's scars tonight. Extra crispy." Laughter splashed across our backyard like beer over a busted cooler. Mom pretended to cough. Dad stared hard at paper plates. I tasted metal and said nothing, because silence holds shape. Uncles cheered, neighbors grinned, and fireworks snapped behind the trampoline. Someone shouted for a selfie with the Brave Family comedian tonight. I smiled like duct tape, holding until the heat finally cooled. Wyatt bowed dramatically, Carter winked, and the speakers squealed feedback. Inside, my ribs argued softly, then promised to learn quieter armor. They said it was jokes, family roasting, American fun with burgers, but the mic made every chuckle feel like a courtroom verdict. I kept pouring lemonade, pretending citrus could wash memories clean. An aunt pinched my arm and whispered, "Lighten up, hero." Her perfume smelled like apricots and summers I no longer trusted. Wyatt raised his cup, shouting, "To resilience," like he invented surviving. Carter clapped my shoulders twice, a drummer counting someone's heartbeat. I remembered the fire, skin tightening like stubborn plastic over bone. I remembered hospital tiles, white squares measuring months without weather. Their jokes rewound everything, then projected it across our fence. After dinner, I escaped to the driveway where shadows cooled. Cars idled nearby, streetlights humming like teachers who know better. Elbows on my knees, I breathed until oxygen forgave embarrassment. Rosa Bell, our neighbor, appeared holding Tupperware in small mercy. She said, "You don't deserve jokes that steal your breath." I shrugged, practicing the trick where pain looks cooperative enough. Rosa set the container down, eyes steady like level bubbles. She said, "When they finish laughing, fix something they can't." Her words knocked quietly, then waited at my ribcage door. I pocketed them beside keys, like tools stored for later. Inside, the party dragged on, music skipping over uneven boards. Dad grilled another round, smoke building curtains between conversations that night. Mom told a neighbor my scars made me stronger somehow. I wanted to ask stronger for whom, but swallowed questions whole. Wyatt found me near the sink, grinning like he'd won. "We're just keeping it light," he said, palms up tonight. Carter added, "Tough love keeps families honest, eyes innocent wide." I nodded, the universal sign for detonations delayed until later. My reflection in the window looked like melted glass cooling. It would harden differently, maybe clearer, maybe stronger. Definitely mine. On the drive home, meridian lights floated like tired fireflies. Wind from the interstate scraped my thoughts into manageable piles. The burns pulsed their familiar code, a Morse for persistence. I remembered the accident, the propane flare, the sudden winter. Doctors spoke gently, bills spoke louder, friends eventually spoke less. Wyatt joked early, then Carter joined, thinking laughter equals medicine. Tonight turned that habit into theater, with me rehearsing pain. At a red light, I practiced a sentence without tremble. I said, "Let work catch fire where cruelty burned out." Then I whispered, "Armor forms where heat once lived, longest." At home, my studio smelled like glue, leather, and effort. I cleaned the table, aligned tools, and breathed until steady. Scar tissue tightens with weather, but loosens when purpose arrives. I pulled a ruined belt from the junk drawer, considering possibilities. Could I stitch cleaner lines than their jokes tonight provided? Could I hammer edges smooth, then wear them like truth? Rose's words returned, patient as porch lights after storms outside. Fix something they can't. Fix something they never even see. I set aside anger, choosing thread, wax, and steady rhythm. The needle sang, and the room finally answered with quiet. Morning found me raw, but moving like a man rebuilding scaffolding. I drove to the river path and walked until shoulders unlocked. Geese cut the sky, leaving instructions for organized, faithful travel. I repeated a sentence until it nested under breath gently. "Let me turn scars into shelter for someone else," I said. No podium, no audience, just pavement and the Boise morning. I would build armor you could touch, not only admire. I would outlast their laughter with craftsmanship and measurable kindness. I would rise quietly, letting results translate what pain taught, and one day they'd see the armor shining without applause. The day after, silence pressed on the walls like weather. I lay awake, watching dust drift through slanted winter light. Coffee burned bitter, but I kept sipping like punishment anyway. My scars ached, tight cords tuned to shame and memory. Wyatt's jokes looped. Carter's smirk welded itself behind my eyes. I tried prayer, but words sounded borrowed from stronger men. Bills lurked under magnets, colored threats arranged like parade flags. Mom texted hearts. I stared until they turned into periods. I wanted to move, but grief stapled everything in place. I whispered, "Help me stand," and nobody answered except daylight. I took temp work unloading pallets behind a grocery store today. The foreman squinted, asked if heat bothered my skin today. I lied, because poverty burns longer than any August sun. By noon, my shirt clung like regret after a sermon. A kid snapped photos, whispered, "That's the crispy brother online." I pretended not to hear, stacking boxes into obedient towers. During break, I washed my face in a mop sink. The mirror offered a stranger who almost believed the slurs. I quit before sunset, pockets light, pride spilling behind me. Rock bottom tasted like metal, rubber, and fluorescent fatigue tonight. That evening I walked the river path until numb returned. Cold bit gently, inviting surrender. Dressed as peaceful rest tonight, I studied black water, pictured myself erasing without commotion altogether. A bicycle bell chimed, pulling me back towards stubborn breath. I sat, counted bridges, and practiced living minute by minute. An older man passed, nodding like he'd survived similar thoughts. He said, "Keep going," and didn't ask for explanations tonight. That mercy, small as gravel, kept my shoes moving forward. I promised the river I'd try again tomorrow morning early. Promises feel heavier when nobody else is keeping score anyway. 2 days later, the Subaru coughed smoke outside Hank Porter's. I limped inside, buying coolant, bandages, and cheap ramen cups. The bell jingled. A wildfire crew filed through the doorway. Their jackets smelled like ash, pine, and long unpaid hours. They bought gloves, headlamps, and burn gel without conversation today. One captain noticed my hands and the tight scar bands. He said, "You working fires?" Like checking for brothers here. I shook my head, unsure whether pride or fear answered. He nodded, respectful, then asked where to find better gloves. Hank pointed him toward aisle 7, then looked at me. Hank said, "You okay?" Not really asking permission for honesty. I shrugged because words sometimes reopen stitches better left alone. The captain returned, holding gloves that would blister tomorrow anyway. He glanced again, then said, "You know good gear matters." I answered, "I learned the expensive way once before, brother." He nodded, like soldiers sometimes salute unspoken, shared history softly. They left, and the door sighed with closing winter air. Hank rang me up, then pushed aside the plastic bin. He said, "Come by after hours, sweep, learn, fix things." I blinked, hearing Rosa's challenge knocking again, suddenly louder inside. Rock bottom softened, not vanished, like coals under gray ash. I swept Hank's aisles, sorted screws, and learned label languages. He paid me cash, no judgment, just small, reliable hours. At night, I walked past the river and argued gently. I told my scars they were maps, not verdicts anymore. I told my breath it belonged here, not yesterday's stage. Sometimes I lost, and the night pressed harder again anyway. Sometimes I won, and morning arrived without extra weight attached. Either way, I kept walking the miles and minutes faithfully. A reason to live flickered like neon, stubborn and imperfect. Rosa stopped me Tuesday, handing back the empty Tupperware quietly. She said, "You still breathing, Nolan?" A statement, not question. I nodded, then admitted the night still carried broken glass. She said, "Keep a project ready before darkness starts arguing." I asked which project, because I had more emptiness than ideas. She smiled, pointed at my belt, and said, "Repair that." I laughed, surprised by the smallness of her prescription tonight. Small things teach bigger lessons if hands keep showing up. I promised to fix something daily, even on hopeless days. Her nod felt like certification stamped onto unsteady courage today. That night, I wrote 3 lines on an index card. Breathe first, work second, rest last, repeat until morning returns. I taped it above the sink where doubt collects easily. I sharpened a pocket knife, repaired my belt, and waited quietly. Sleep came slower, but it arrived like weather finally cooperating. In the morning, I returned to Hank's, ready for sweeping. He nodded toward the back, where scraps waited like invitations. I felt purpose stir, small and warm, beneath scar tissue. Rock bottom loosened its grip, resentful but willing to negotiate. Tomorrow would need courage. Tonight offered mercy I could keep. Hank's shop smelled like rust, pine, and warm dust clinging to metal shelves. I swept until closing, listening to old country hums on his radio. After the final customer left, he motioned toward the back workbench. "You got steady hands," he said. "Try cutting a strip straight through." I took the knife, guided by muscle memory and curiosity. The blade hesitated where the leather thickened, but I pushed through. "Clean enough," Hank said. "You learn by ruining, then fixing it." He tossed me a small bundle of scraps, soft brown hide from old belts. "Practice," he said, and turned off the sign. I didn't know it then, but that word would anchor everything that followed. That night, I sat at my kitchen table under a yellow bulb. The scraps weighted beside my old gloves, the seams splitting like old arguments. I traced shapes without purpose, just following the grain's suggestion. Each slice whispered possibility if handled right, if patient enough. My fingers cramped, and the scars tugged like rope under skin. Still, the rhythm steadied something deeper than muscles or pride. I stitched unevenly, burned my thumb, and bled a little onto the hide. The blood darkened, blending in, becoming part of the piece quietly. When I finished, I had nothing useful, but I had movement again. I slept that night without dreaming of laughter or microphones. Weeks stretched into a steady hum of work and late-night learning. Hank taught me knots, dies, and how patience hides in repetition. "Leather remembers pressure," he'd say, "so treat it like it's alive." I practiced small repairs for customers he didn't have time to fix. Men dropped off tool belts, boots, straps from years of field work. I charged $5, then $10, testing how humility priced itself. One afternoon, Hank handed me a contact sheet for the swap meet. "Booth's cheap," he said. "People buy stories if the stitching's honest." I stared at the form, half terrified, half ready for risk. Fear and excitement felt identical now, just spelled differently in breath. The Saturday market buzzed with heat and the smell of fried dough. I set up a folding table beside a beekeeper and a comic vendor. My sign read, "Handmade repairs. Burned, but not broken." Some laughed, others stopped. Just long enough to read twice. A boy asked if I could fix his father's old baseball glove. I said yes, even though I wasn't sure I could yet. His trust steadied my hands more than skill ever did. By afternoon, I'd earned $40 and a quiet kind of pride. A woman from a biker club bought a pair of repaired gloves. "You understand pain," she said, handing me cash. "That's why your work fits right." That evening, Rosa found me cleaning up my booth. "You learned faster than gossip," she said, smiling. I laughed for the first time in weeks, the sound foreign. She touched one of the bracers I'd made from leftover scraps. "You could sell these," she said. "They look strong but lived in." "Like me," I joked, and she nodded, eyes soft. She told me about her years sewing theater costumes downtown. "Material doesn't lie," she said. "Neither do people who've been burned." She offered to teach me patterns after work if I stayed committed. "Only rule," she added. "No pity in the seams." I promised, and for once I meant it. Rosa's studio smelled like chalk, starch, and hope disguised as fabric. We worked after sunset, her hands sketching arcs with ruler precision. "Everything sturdy begins with symmetry," she said, cutting a paper mock-up. I traced it onto hide, careful not to waste the clean edges. She showed me how to curve straps around movement, not just shape. "Armor doesn't have to look angry," she reminded me softly. "It can just look ready." I watched her fingers dance through thread, quick as forgiveness. For the first time, my scars didn't feel like warnings. They felt like blueprints for something meant to endure. The orders stayed small, but satisfaction started lasting longer than fear. A barista from downtown asked for an apron that could handle heat. I made one with reinforced seams and a strap wide enough to breathe. When I delivered it, she paid double, saying it looked like dignity stitched in. Word spread slowly through people who understood work over words. Mechanics, painters, cooks, all found use for what my hands built quietly. I never bragged or explained. I just delivered on time, no excuses. Each finished piece loosened another knot inside my chest. The laughter that once haunted me began losing its script. The silence that followed felt earned instead of empty. One night, after closing, Hank came by carrying a toolbox. "You're good enough to rent the back garage," he said simply. I stared at him, unsure if he was joking or testing resolve. "First month half price," he added, "because I like watching people rebuild." I moved my supplies that weekend: knife, glue, hammer, and courage. The small room smelled like oil and possibility. I hung my burned gloves by the door like an oath. Above the workbench, I taped Rose's line in red marker. No pity in the seams. I was still broke, still scarred, but finally becoming my own craftsman. That winter, I branded my first logo onto a belt, Briggs Forge and Hide. The letters pressed clean and deep into the leather, no hesitation. I traced my fingertips over it, feeling permanence without needing applause. This wasn't revenge yet, but it was foundation. Solid, honest, built by hand. Wyatt's laughter faded into background noise behind sanding blocks and radio hums. Carter's smirk dissolved under the rhythm of hammer and needle. I wasn't healed, but I was busy healing others through what I made. Every scar had turned into instruction, every insult into endurance. I wasn't done falling, but I'd learned how to land with purpose. Orders arrived like steady rain across a roof that finally held. I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and unlocked the garage door. Dust lifted in the heater's breath, twirling like patient galaxies. I laid out tools in rows, because order softened noise. My scars pulsed gently, reminding me what storms had taught. The first belt shipped to Wyoming, wrapped in craft paper. A mechanic from Nampa wanted a heat-proof apron with pockets. A baker needed straps that didn't bite under early morning ovens. I learned people's work like topography maps folded inside conversations. Their needs shaped my patterns better than any textbook guess. Hank watched my schedule and tightened screws I forgot during rush. Slow is accurate, accurate becomes fast, he said, handing sandpaper sheets. I wrote that beside Rose's reminder, taping both above eye level. Returns happened rarely, but I repaired them before excuses formed. When a rivet popped on a contractor's pouch, I apologized immediately. He expected arguments, but got coffee, a chair, and an upgraded strap. You fixed it better than new, he said, knuckles rough. Reliability slowly replaced the old jokes floating around Meridian cookouts. People still remembered, but they remembered my deliveries more than punchlines. Reputation grew from careful stitches, not from speeches hammered into microphones. Weekends meant the market, wind flapping tents like restless wings. I adjusted the display, moved bracers forward, tucked belts behind aprons. A firefighter trainee tested the bracer's padding against a hot kettle carefully. Feels right, he said, flexing wrist bones beneath reinforced leather calmly. I learned to listen for questions people were too proud asking. Some customers wanted strength without bulk, dignity without shouting, armor without drama. I trimmed edges shorter, softened lining, and widened straps for breath. Selling felt less like persuasion, more like shepherding a good fit. When the sun dropped, I packed receipts, notes, and unspent bitterness. The drive home tasted like coffee and a quieter heart. Rosa visited after closing, measuring seams with eyes older than mine. She checked symmetry, then taught me bar tacks for heavy strain. Overbuild the stress points, she said, because life always overtests them. We stood shoulder to shoulder, breathing in glue and cold air. I practiced until the machine thrummed like a satisfied animal nearby. She corrected gently, then celebrated one perfect curve with a grin. That's how resilience looks, she said, tapping the finished apron. Under her gaze, pity never touched my bench or lines. Her belief weighed more than money and pulled me forward. I promised to defend that standard, even when orders doubled. Spring pushed through Boise like a carpenter squaring stubborn corners. I rented the small bay behind the tire shop finally. Hank handed me a key, smiling like he'd miscounted blessings. We moved tables, racks, and a press rescued from a farm. The space smelled like rubber ghosts and possibility layered together. I drew a chalk line where the cutting table belonged. Another line marked packaging, then shipping, then a place for returns. I mounted pegs, labeled bins, and swept until concrete shined bravely. Above the door, I hung my burned gloves like guardians. Every entrance passed under them, remembering the night jokes turned cruel. I sketched a proper logo across an index card's torn edge. Briggs Forge and Hide curved like a horseshoe hugging a steady horizon. I stamped it cleaner into scrap, then onto a belt. Each press felt like telling the world, I'm not hiding. Orders swelled from contractors, baristas, barbers, and volunteer firefighters regionally. Photos arrived, flour-dusted aprons, oil-darkened belts, gloves holding stubborn wrenches. People wrote short notes I kept folded under the cash drawer. This made me safer today, one letter said, which changed everything. Safety tasted like redemption, because it protected strangers from familiar heat. My armor had learned to guard other bodies besides mine. Money stayed thin, but steadier than the months before rebuilding. I tracked every purchase, every inch of hide, every box shipped. Hank showed spreadsheets. Rosa reviewed prices, nudging them toward fairness gently. "Charge for the years you survived learning," she said, eyes steady. I raised rates slightly, then added free repairs during the first year. Customers appreciated the promise more than the discount's short thrill. The register drawer sang less often, but louder with respect. Bills still worried, but they stopped shouting like carnival barkers. Scar tissue ached on cold mornings, then relaxed under movement faithfully. Work and pain negotiated boundaries without cruelty or winners anymore. Wyatt and Carter stayed silent, which worked better than apologies currently. Mom sent photos from Sunday dinner, plates steaming, everyone arranged carefully. I answered with gratitude, declined invitations, and kept my sentences short. Dad stopped by once, pretending he needed nails and rope. He ran a finger along an apron's edge and nodded. "Straight," he said, which from him was almost a blessing. He didn't mention the party, the jokes, or the mic. I didn't mention anything except pickup hours and care instructions calmly. We stood inside a truce shaped like leather and shared history. He left with rope and something invisible that weighed less. Heat rolled across June like asphalt stretching under distant truck tires. A volunteer crew ordered 6 aprons and 12 reinforced wrist guards. "Wildland season's early," the caller said, voice tired and grateful. I worked late, radio low, stitching while insects tapped windows politely. Every strap passed through my hands like a vow repeated. I pictured smoke, brush, and glowing lines eating hillsides hungrily. Prayer slipped out sometimes, simple as breath and nearly silent. "Hold," I whispered, to seams, to crews, to my own patience. Packages left stacked like bricks beside a future I respected. The bay door closed on time, and dignity stood watch. The local paper asked for a quote after seeing our market line. I kept it plain. Work should help people hold their lives together. The reporter smiled, wrote fast, then photographed my table and gloves. A week later, the article ran above fold on Saturday. Customers arrived carrying clippings folded into careful rectangles and optimism. I felt fear rise, then settle, like bubbles escaping glue. Visibility once meant danger. Now it simply meant answering consistently. With every hand I shook, the old laughter lost oxygen. Boise knew me for service, not surviving a joke anymore. That shift mattered more than any invoice or applause collector. One night, I stayed late repairing a strap scratched by sparks. The shop buzzed soft, and the streets outside calmed entirely. I held the piece against the light and checked alignment carefully. Behind me, the burned gloves watched like gentle security guards overhead. I thought about armor again, and how mine finally fit. Not spikes, not shields, just competence stitched where cruelty failed. Every stitch repeated Rosa's rule. No pity hidden anywhere. Every buckle repeated Hank's rule. Slow becomes accurate, then fast. Growth felt like breathing steady through work that carried weight. I locked up smiling, knowing grit had finally become grace. The email arrived on a Wednesday. Subject line clean and ordinary. Vendor opportunities. Idaho Wildfire Expo. I almost deleted it, assuming spam or mistake, but the name at the bottom made me stop. Captain R. Jennings, Boise Fire Department. He'd seen one of my aprons at the Greenway maintenance site. "We're hosting a regional safety expo," he wrote. "Would you consider showcasing your gear?" My thumb hovered over reply while my stomach fluttered. For years, fire had defined what broke me. Now it wanted a conversation. I typed yes, then deleted it twice before finally pressing send. The next 3 weeks blurred into a storm of cutting, stitching, and sealing. I built every display piece by hand. Heat-resistant gloves, aprons, and guards. The garage became a battlefield of thread, oil, and late-night coffee. Caleb, a volunteer from the hardware store, helped burnish edges and polish buckles. Rosa stopped by, tracing each stitch like she was reading prayer lines. "Don't overcomplicate it," she said. "Let the scars show in the work." I smiled. "That's kind of the brand," I said. She laughed, but her eyes were soft with pride. I could tell she'd already decided I belonged in that hall. The expo filled the Boise Civic Center. Banners hung from rafters like sails. Vendors unloaded generators, hoses, and safety drones, while crews carried clipboards. I set up my booth in a corner beside a gear manufacturer from Spokane. My sign read simply, Briggs Forge and Hide, built from heat. A few attendees nodded politely, but most kept walking. I remembered the party years ago, laughter ricocheting against my ribs. The difference now was that I didn't flinch. A firefighter stopped to try on a wrist guard, flexing thoughtfully. Solid, he said. You a welder? Burn survivor, I said. He blinked, then smiled quietly. Makes sense. By noon, the aisle buzzed with conversation around my booth. A group of forestry students asked about the stitching, jotting notes between sips of free coffee. A reporter from the Idaho Statesman took photos, promising to do a human interest piece. When Captain Jennings stopped by, his handshake was firm and grateful. You're the first vendor who looks like he's lived what he sells, he said. I nodded. I built what I needed back then. He studied the gloves, then added, We'll take a set for field testing. My chest tightened, not from nerves, but from recognition. This wasn't revenge, it was validation written in purchase orders. The story ran the following Sunday, from fire to forge. One man turns pain into protection. It wasn't flashy, but the headline carried truth like a heartbeat. Orders tripled within a week, mostly from stations across Idaho and Montana. I hired Caleb full-time, then another part-timer from Rosa's sewing class. Hank helped convert the bay's storage corner into a shipping area. I bought a second-hand press and upgraded the cutting table. Each tool felt like a medal earned without ceremony. Every sound in the shop, stapler clicks, blade scrapes, thread hums, was proof that I had turned mockery into motion. One afternoon, I returned from deliveries to find Rosa standing by the counter, holding a newspaper. Your brothers will read this, she said, smiling. I froze, realizing she was right. They'll see the scars differently now, she added. I shook my head. Maybe, but that's their work to do. She tilted her chin, watching me. You really don't hate them anymore, do you? I paused, testing the thought. No, I said finally. I just stopped letting them be my story. She nodded, satisfied. That's how peace begins, she said, when you retire from proving people wrong. A few days later, an email arrived from a city event planner. We're hosting a fundraiser for wildfire relief. Would you sponsor equipment for the demo? Attached was the donor list. Corporations, state offices, and one familiar name, Wyatt Briggs, Briggs Real Estate Group. My pulse thudded once, sharp but not bitter. The invitation felt like a full circle drawn by steady hands. I typed, Yes, Briggs Forge and Hide will provide safety gear for demonstration teams. I didn't mention family. I didn't need to. For years my name had lived under theirs. Now it would appear beside it, quiet, level, earned. That night, I sat outside the shop with the lights off. The city buzzed in the distance, and the smell of cedar glue hung thick. I thought of my brothers, their laughter still echoing faintly but fading more each day. I wasn't chasing apologies or revenge anymore. I'd already won in ways they couldn't measure, through steadiness, through usefulness, through peace that didn't need witnesses. The scars across my arms felt different under the moonlight. Not decorations, not burdens, just evidence that I'd been tempered, not broken. Somewhere deep down, I knew the reunion was coming, and for once, I wasn't afraid to be seen. The fundraiser took place on a Saturday that smelled like wood smoke and rain. The hills around Boise shimmered green from early storms, and tents lined the park where crews set up safety demos. I arrived early, unloading gear beside the stage. Each apron and wrist guard hung from stands like quiet flags. The banner read, Briggs Forge and Hide, protecting those who protect. I checked every strap twice because calm comes from readiness. Caleb ran extension cords. Rosa arranged flyers with practiced hands. Hank waved from the coffee truck, laughing like he owned the morning. None of us mentioned who else might show up. By noon, the park filled with families, volunteers, and donors clutching programs. The MC thanked sponsors while kids clambered over an old fire truck. I adjusted the mic near our booth for the gear demonstration. Across the lawn, a familiar voice floated through the speakers. Wyatt's. Our community stands strongest when we invest in those who keep it safe, he said. I turned and saw him at the podium, suit pressed, hair perfect, smile polished. Beside him, Carter held cue cards and handed out awards. Their company logo gleamed on the sponsorship banner beside mine. My pulse quickened, but not from anger, just gravity. The past had shown up dressed in confidence again. After their speech, volunteers rotated through booths, shaking hands and posing for photos. Wyatt approached our tent with his practiced grin. Well, he said, eyes flicking to the logo. Looks like you finally found your thing. Looks like it, I said, adjusting a strap on the display. He picked up one of the gloves, turning it over like evidence. These are yours? He asked. Mine and my team's, I answered. You remember Rosa? I added, nodding toward her. Rosa smiled politely, eyes like steel under sunlight. You must be the brother who makes noise, she said. Wyatt chuckled, half embarrassed, half intrigued. That'd be me, he said, setting the glove down carefully. Carter appeared a moment later, hands in his pockets, expression cautious. Hey, Nolan, he said. Been a long time. Long enough, I said. He nodded toward the gear. This is impressive. The word hung awkwardly, like it wasn't the one he meant. Rosa handed him a brochure, saving him from the silence. Each piece is handmade, she said. No pity in the seams. He looked at her, unsure if it was praise or warning. I like that, he muttered. I smiled slightly. It's our motto. They both stood there, caught between curiosity and remorse. For once I didn't fill the air with explanations. I let their discomfort do the work. The MC called for the demonstration, and the crowd gathered close. Caleb suited up in one of our aprons while a firefighter lit a controlled flame on a steel tray. The heat shimmered, the apron held. Kids gasped, adults clapped, cameras flashed. Wyatt stood beside me, watching with quiet awe. That's incredible, he said. I didn't know you could. He trailed off, as if the sentence had too many ghosts. Most people didn't, I said, but I always could. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw no arrogance, just something like guilt wrapped in admiration. The applause faded into an echo that seemed to stretch through every year between us. Reporters took photos afterward, noting the sponsors listed behind the stage. Briggs Forge and Hyde beside Briggs Real Estate. 2 different worlds sharing one name without competition. I could feel people connecting the dots, whispering softly. They're brothers? Someone said. No way. Wyatt heard it too. He smiled weakly and said, Guess news travels fast. I shrugged. It always does. What matters is what sticks. He laughed once, quietly. You've changed. That was the point, I said. He nodded, then reached to shake my hand. His grip was firm but unsure, the kind that wanted forgiveness but hadn't earned it yet. I shook it anyway. When the event ended, families drifted away, and the park grew quiet again. The sun broke through clouds, glinting off the metal edges of our stands. I packed, slowly, savoring the rhythm of closure. Wyatt walked over one last time, hands shoved in his pockets. You handled yourself well today, he said. I don't know if I'd have your restraint. I smiled faintly. It takes years of practice. He nodded, then said softly, Maybe we should talk sometime. I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. Maybe, I said, when you're ready to listen. He opened his mouth to reply, then stopped. Instead, he just nodded and walked back toward Carter. As they disappeared into the crowd, Rosa came beside me. That felt like a movie, she said. No, I said, coiling the last extension cord. Movies end with applause. Real life ends with quiet. She grinned. Well, you've earned both. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke and spring flowers together. I stood there watching the flags flutter above our booth, 2 logos side by side, the past and present sharing the same wind. My armor didn't shine, it simply held. The call came 3 days after the fundraiser, late in the evening. The shop was closed, the radio low, the workbench still warm from sanding. My phone buzzed across the table, screen flashing Wyatt's name. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring itself, tired, but curiosity can sound like forgiveness if you're not careful. I answered. Hey, he said quietly. His voice didn't carry its usual weight, just exhaustion. I owe you a conversation. I leaned against the bench, staring at the hanging gloves. Then have it, I said. I'm listening. He sighed, a long, fragile sound that didn't fit the brother I used to know. I don't even know where to start, he said. Maybe with the night of the cookout. My chest tightened, memories replaying without invitation. You don't have to relive it, I said. But he kept talking. I do, he said, because I made it a joke when it was really jealousy. You were tougher than me, even then. You survived something I couldn't even look at. His words hung between us, heavy but honest. I thought if I laughed first, people would stop seeing it. But all I did was make sure they saw you instead. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the heater, letting his words settle like dust after a storm. Carter called the next day. His voice shook more than Wyatt's, like guilt had been fermenting longer. I watched that demo, he said. You looked steady, like someone who doesn't need to fight anymore. I didn't say anything, and the silence made him stumble. I went home that night and couldn't sleep, he said. I kept hearing myself laughing at you years ago. I thought it was harmless, but I see now it was just cowardice dressed up as humor. He paused, breathing heavy. I'm sorry, Nolan. Truly. We were cruel because we were weak. I wanted to be angry, to say something sharp and final, but nothing came. Just quiet understanding that some apologies aren't meant to erase. They're meant to echo. They both came by the shop that weekend, unannounced but expected somehow. The bay door was open. Sunlight spilled across the floor like truth that didn't need permission. Wyatt walked in first. No jacket, no swagger. Carter followed, eyes down. We figured you'd be here, Wyatt said. You always were the one who stayed late. I didn't smile, but I didn't frown either. I like quiet, I said. Noise gets in the way of real work. They looked around the shop. The racks, the patterns, the gloves hanging in tidy rows. You really built all this? Carter asked. Yeah, I said, from what was left of me. Wyatt took a step closer. I said something at the fundraiser, he began, about strength in the community. I meant it, but it wasn't mine to claim. It was yours. His voice cracked, and he rubbed his eyes like a man unlearning pride. I thought success would drown regret. Turns out it just makes the silence louder. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. It does. Carter glanced at the burned gloves by the door, the ones that watched over every project. Those yours? He asked softly. They were, I said. Now they're reminders. Pain deserves a purpose? The shop felt smaller then, filled not with tension but the gravity of truth catching up. Wyatt finally spoke again, words unraveling like threads pulled too long. We never hated you, Nolan, he said. We just didn't understand how to live in your shadow without breaking something. I studied him, the way his shoulders sagged under sentences years overdue. You didn't hate me, I said. You feared the part of me you couldn't destroy. The words came out calm, not cruel. He nodded, tears welling but never falling. You're right, he said. And now I see that all your scars, they were never weakness. They were proof of what I could never endure. The silence that followed felt almost holy, like confession without audience. I motioned toward the stools by the workbench. Sit, I said. If you're here, you might as well stay a while. They did cautiously, like guests in a church they didn't believe in yet. I poured coffee, and we sat there surrounded by the smell of cedar and glue. I don't know how to fix this, Wyatt said. Maybe you don't, I replied. Maybe fixing isn't the point. Maybe it's about carrying the weight better. Carter looked at his hands. You've forgiven us, haven't you? He asked. I met his eyes. Forgiveness isn't something you give once, I said. It's something you keep choosing until it feels true. They stayed another hour, talking about everything but the past. Work, families, life, the weather. Small talk that felt like mercy disguised as conversation. When they left, Wyatt turned at the door. You ever need anything? He said. We're here. I nodded. I know, I said, though I didn't. The door closed behind them, the sound soft as a benediction. I sat there a while, staring at the space they'd occupied. For the first time in years, the shop felt full and empty in equal measure. The armor I'd built didn't need sharpening, and it just needed to hold. When night came, I turned off the lights and stood in the dark, listening to the echo of their voices fading into the quiet. Forgiveness hadn't changed what happened, but it had changed me. It turned the scars into lessons, the silence into strength. I realized I didn't need them to carry my story anymore. I'd already built my ending out of leather, time, and truth. Spring melted into something calmer, something earned. The mornings came soft, sunlight glancing off the workshop's windows like forgiveness. I no longer woke with the heaviness of unfinished conversations pressing on my chest. My brothers hadn't called again, but they didn't need to. Their silence had changed shape. It wasn't distance anymore, it was respect. Every scar still caught light differently, but now I saw beauty in the patterns. I'd stopped asking why the fire happened, why the laughter burned worse, why family failed before they learned how to heal. Instead, I asked simpler questions. What can I build today, and who might it help? Those answers filled my hands before my heart even noticed. Business carried on steady, though I never measured peace in numbers anymore. Caleb took over most orders, his confidence tempered by the same humility that built me. Rosa retired from teaching, but she still stopped by sometimes with lemon cake and advice disguised as gossip. Hank sold the hardware store and spent his afternoons fishing, always leaving me a voicemail that said, "Keep making what matters." I did. My hands didn't chase perfection anymore. They chased meaning. Some days that meant stitching a firefighter's name into his gloves. Other days it meant repairing a belt for free because the man reminded me of myself, working too hard for too little, but refusing to stop. That kind of strength deserved reinforcement, not sympathy. One evening, I drove to the Greenway after closing just to see the benches I'd built still standing. The sun was setting, streaking the river orange and gold. A family sat on one of them, eating ice cream and laughing. The father pointed to the small plaque with my shop's name engraved on it. His daughter read it aloud, stumbling through the words, "Briggs Forge and Hide." I smiled, wondering if someday she'd understand the story behind those letters. The man who was mocked for the very thing that made him unbreakable. I sat on another bench nearby, ran my hand along the grain, and felt something like prayer rise quietly through the wood. Sometimes I still saw Wyatt around town, once at a coffee shop, once at a community board meeting. We always exchanged nods, brief but real. No apologies needed repeating, no new words required. Carter sent Christmas cards now, short notes about his kids, always ending with "Proud of you, brother." I never wrote back, but I always read them twice. Forgiveness didn't erase distance. It just built bridges that didn't have to be crossed every day. I understood that now. Family doesn't always come back together in the same shape it broke apart. Sometimes it just learns how to stop throwing stones across the water. That fall, I was asked to speak at the same expo that had once changed everything. I almost said no, but Rosa insisted. "You've spent years letting your work talk," she said. "Maybe it's time to let your voice catch up." So I stood on that stage under the same rafters, the same banners fluttering above me, and told them about survival. Not the cinematic kind, but the everyday kind. The kind where you keep showing up to your own life, even when you hate its shape. I told them that scars are not decorations or warnings. They are records of every time we refused to stay burned. The audience didn't clap right away. They just stood quietly, listening like people who'd remembered something important. Then they applauded, not for me, but for themselves. Afterward, a teenage boy approached me with nervous hands. "I've got burns too," he said. People stare. I looked him in the eye and smiled. "Good," I said. "Let them. They're looking at proof that you made it." He smiled back, small and shaky, but true. Watching him walk away, I realized the story had traveled full circle, not about revenge, not even redemption, but transformation. Every time someone wore my work, they carried a piece of that transformation into the world. That was legacy enough. On the last night before winter, I closed the shop early and drove into the mountains. The air was cold, the stars clean and sharp. I parked at a lookout where the valley lights shimmered like embers. I thought about the boy at the expo, about my brothers, about all the ways life had burned and rebuilt me. I rolled up my sleeves, let the wind touch my arms, and felt no shame, only gratitude. Every scar was a sentence, every sentence a story, every story a map back home. When I drove back, I passed a billboard for my brother's real estate company. Their slogan read, "Building what lasts." I laughed softly because for the first time it didn't sting. We had all found our ways to build. Mine just happened to be quieter. I turned down the radio, opened the window, and let the cold air rush in like forgiveness that finally caught up. If this story reached you, share it with someone who's learning to carry their scars differently, and tell me if the people who mocked your pain came to you years later with remorse in their eyes, would you forgive them or let silence guard your peace forever?